This is Dale Tell Me. Our podcast in Spanish is Dale Cuéntame. We're having conversations with changemakers, and today's guest is Tashanda Giles-Jones. She's a true activist for the environment and education. And I have to tell you that we had a lot of fun during the chat, so I hope you enjoy it too. Yes, I am so happy we're talking today, Tashanda. I had to tell you, you are one of those angels that I met in the City of Angels. I remember when I met you, and that was a while ago. You are one of those brilliant minds, but you have such a kind spirit that I am so glad you're here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rossi. That's so sweet. I feel the exact same way. It is really special, right? We had this time together that was so limited, but I agree. I think we hit it off, and there was so much likeness, and we learned so much from each other. So I'm very happy to be here.
And it's because you are a kind person. And so we're going to talk how we met later. But right now, since this is a show for you talking to us, is Dale Tell Me. So again, we're going to talk about three things. How you change in your career from the medical field to an environmental educator. You're going to give us recommendations on about the environment. I think you're really an expert and activist on this and educator. And of course, I like your input on the Black History Month. So let's start with your history. You were born in New York, right?
Yes. I was born in Brooklyn, New York. My parents were young parents. My mother was 17 and my father was 18. My mother was an immigrant from Trinidad and had me. And my father joined the Navy. So by the time I turned about 4, we moved to Washington State, to Bremerton. Where there was a base. And so he finished out his term there, and we lived and then moved into the mainland, into Seattle. And my dad went to school and became an engineer and was working in Boeing. And I loved growing up in Seattle. We lived there until my parents separated when I was about 14. But the majority of my formative years are remembered very fondly in Seattle and traveling back to Brooklyn. I contribute both of those places really transformative, are a part of how I became an educator and working in the environmental field. But once I moved to California, this is where I've lived and where I started my family and where I've always worked. I still visit those other places often because I still have family there. But when I think about how I entered medicine, the women in my family all have been healers of some sort, which is quite interesting. My mother's mother, my grandmother, was a caretaker and immigrated here to get her degree and work in medicine. My father's mother was an oncology nurse before she retired, and my aunts were nurses. And so my mom worked in nephrology as well. And so on my vacations, like from high school, I would go and work in the clinics on weekends or, whenever they wanted me to come in. And I was taught, the office work, how I was doing billing, like when I was 18, learning all of those ropes. And then they would just like on the side show me what it meant to have kidney failure. And at that time, I thought I wanted to be a doctor. So it was just like golden for me to have this hands-on experience. I wanted to be a pediatrician and or work in politics because I was really interested in political science. But as I look back, I realized that education also was a major part of my formative years. I was always kind of like that middle cousin. So we played school a lot. I was always in positions in school, in elementary and middle school, where I was in leadership roles. I was always in leadership. I was always in some kind of program where I was teaching others. And then in my 11th and 12th grade year, I totally forgot I'd done this stuff until someone brought it up to me. We had a preschool program on our high school and campus, and you took this program for like 2 years, and you got to go through the whole program of early childhood education and how to run a daycare, how to work at a daycare. And then if you completed that, then you got to work as a teacher's assistant at a local elementary school. So in my senior year, I got to be a TA in a 3rd grade class. of special needs kids, which was my absolute favorite. So that's where the pediatrician part came in. And then fast forward, I went into medicine. So I went into nephrology. It was an easy family kind of roll in situation, and truly enjoyed being in the healthcare industry. Realized quite immediately that being a physician was not my goal, my full goal, because I knew there were other things I wanted to do in my life too. I just loved being creative. I knew that I wanted to do more than going to school for about 12 to 15 years was going to allow me to do. And then working with doctors, there were just, it was the very heavy side of what you had to kind of not leave behind, but like decide what had priority when you were going into a field like that. And I didn't ever want to, I don't know, I didn't ever wanted to regret doing it. And I never wanted to feel any kind of animosity towards it, because it's such, just like education, one of those types of industries where you're dealing with people's lives and their souls,
Yeah.
and at their
But
most
let me
difficult
interrupt
time.
you. Yeah, but
Hmm.
you were working, you worked for almost 2 decades
Yeah.
in the medical field, right? So
Yeah.
what did you do, and where did you work?
Yeah, so I always worked in nephrology, and
Okay.
that's kidney failure. So when I first started, again, I started on the billing side of things, learning Medicare, Medi-Cal, and how you build for dialysis patients, and really learning the back end. I was lucky to have family members and friends who were nephrologists, who were doctors, and allowed me to work in their office. And so I started that way, and then I was trained on the job as I was going to school, how to be a patient care tech. And so those are the folks who are actually giving the treatments. And so I did that for many, many, many years. And in that role, I did research. I worked in early clinical improvement. I worked in policy side of it, because at that time, dialysis was going through merging of private companies. And it's a very interesting and kind of niche type of specialty within medicine that not many doctors specialize in. And so just learning the business side of it is what I did as a patient care tech. And then I kind of evolved into being a preceptor. So as nurses were going through their program and doing their rounds, I would train and educate nurses on the nephrology part. And
Oh,
I got to do,
wow.
yeah, I got to do so many really great things that I also realized allowed me to collect these skills that I really do utilize today. And
Yeah, you're an
so,
educator, and
yeah, and so by the time I left, I'd managed clinics. I worked out of Cedars and helped manage that clinic. I did some patient care initiatives, and working with acutes and transplant and pediatric nephrology, which was like a whole other world. And then right before it had just gotten to a point, I call it my early lifehood crisis. I'd actually gotten a really good position being an executive assistant to a director in clinical improvement, which really had set me up um, to do and go where I wanted. It was great. It was actually a really good friend of mine who had climbed the ladder and really took me along with her. And for some reason, it was also a point in my life where I just felt like personally, I wasn't at my happiest. So it was just like this decline, even though professionally I could see myself getting the things that I really wanted. As I was getting close to that, my my mental and emotional attachment to it was decreasing. So my work ethic wasn't, I have a lot of integrity when I commit to doing a job, and I was finding that that was declining in a way that was making me feel really questionable about myself. And so I did end up taking a year off and had the opportunity to go back and work with the same company. And as that year came up, I took the year and really just stayed home with my family and,
Mm-hmm.
volunteered a lot and just like kind of raised the kids. By that time, I had 4 kids.
Oh, that
And,
was my question. You already had the four children.
yeah, I already had
Oh.
my 4. I had really just had my youngest one, was probably about 2 or so, 2 or 3. And so it was also like I wanted to be home. I knew he was going to be the last one. And,
Mm-hmm.
their father and I did a really good job at like just tag teaming, and he would stay home so that I could go right back to work in the very beginning. And I had never really just had that long period of being home with your babies after you had them, because I was just in such a, I was on this ladder. I was, really wanting to
Mm-hmm.
work. So I did take that year and I just was with the kids. And then I was like, okay, this is not going to work because I don't want to be home full time with 4 kids. Like, my brain is dying for something. So, but I was also having this anxiety as the date came of deciding if I was going to go back to the date, deciding was I going to hold on to my license, because holding on to your license, your nursing license, your patient care license, whatever it is, when you let that lapse, it's not as easy to get that back.
Oh,
So it's really
wow.
like deciding the time frame that was, or that date that was coming up for me to go back. I was having the same kind of I didn't even know it as anxiety at that time. I just knew there was this uneasy feeling in me that I was having at the time that I decided I needed to leave. That, I just needed a breath. And that decision to do that was huge for me because I have worked since the government says you can work. I was so excited to get a worker's permit in high school. I was so excited to
Mm-hmm.
get a job and to not just make my own money, but just like to be part of the workforce. I just remember
Mm-hmm.
growing up understanding that that was a way to give back. Like I could make my own money, but I could also be out there working, and that made me closer to being an adult. So I'd always worked, and stability was always super important for me, knowing I was going to get a check every 2 weeks. Like that was just important. So to just stop all of that at 30, I was 38.
Mm-hmm.
It was a huge dive. It was one of those, I'm just going to hold my breath and do it and not think too much about it, because I know my body is telling me something. It was at that point my body was telling me. So I started feeling that same thing when the anniversary came for me to decide, and that's when I decided, I'm going to let my license go. Because then I don't have a choice. Because if I
Mm-hmm.
had kept my license, then I always
You
had
had
the option to go back,
to go back, of
right?
course. Yeah.
And I felt that if I went back, that wouldn't have been so much of a failure because I had spent so much of my life putting into that. But this was also, Rossi, like at the time we were where the country was going through the recession, and all I kept
Oh.
hearing those years, that couple of years before I quit, was how lucky I was that I had this job, and how lucky
Oh.
I was in medicine because so many people had lost their job, and how lucky I was, and how lucky. So I didn't even feel like I could leave
Mm.
that job because I knew how lucky I was to have that in a time when so many people were losing their job.
Oh, wow.
So to do that was also like, how could you do that? Because it really did shape, the financial stability of my family. My husband is in
Mm-hmm.
entertainment. So
Mm-hmm.
that income was fabulous some years and not
Mm-hmm.
so fabulous other years. And with young children, it was really a
Yeah.
jump of faith. I really didn't have a plan. I just
Mm.
knew it wasn't right and I had to do something else. So when we met, I
Mm.
thought, when once I decided after the year that I didn't want to go back to nursing, let my license lapse, I decided, okay, well, I'll go back to school. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll just, because I've always loved learning, and I always was in school during that time too. I always took classes, always
Mm.
to like in medicine. I always got certified in something new so I could do something. I always took classes so I could like work in the hospital by myself, like all those type of things. I always was a learner. And I said, well, maybe
Mm-hmm.
I'll go back to school full time and figure out something else. And I had always loved nature, just naturally. I grew up in Seattle, and I grew up in a
Mm. Of
time where it
course.
wasn't as developed. Yeah, right. So
Mm-hmm.
I was outside a lot. A
Mm.
lot of my childhood was outside. And so that was very natural to me. And working with the kids, that was
Mm-hmm.
something that I'd always gravitated towards. By the time we met, I had
Mm.
ran Girl Scout troops from the time that my girls were in 5th grade. I was always like their
Oh.
class. garden mom, or, you know, I
Uh-huh.
always did the recycling and all that kind of stuff with the kids and worked in the school garden. So
Uh-huh.
that was just part of what I did outside of my professional life. So I went back to school at Santa Monica College
Uh-huh.
here in Los Angeles and entered into their public policy program. But I was able to do it. I think this was really essential and important because I got a lot of community help and like governmental funding because of the recession to help
Oh.
retrain me. Like those programs really paid for me to go back to school. They really gave me a framework to work within. I had a special counselor because I was an older person, like
Mm.
retraining. And so I really took advantage of all of those programs, so that I could
That's
take the
great.
classes I wanted to. So I went back to school full time
Uh-huh.
and I studied public policy. And then I think one other crucial stepping stone to where I am now was a program called Resource and Recovery Management. And it was
Okay.
this special program that was started through a grant from California State. And it was like a free course that they were trying to, again, retrain people because of the recession. And it was
Uh-huh.
only offered at Santa Monica College and Irvine Community College.
Oh.
And I had just picked up the class because it sounded interesting and I needed 3 more credits to be full time. And when I got into the class, the professor said, there's 3 other classes. This is the last semester that you will pay for you to take it and pay for the books. Would you be interested? And I was like, yeah, why not? And
Mm-hmm.
I still go in to this day and I speak in the 3rd course of that class.
Oh,
I have stayed
wow.
connected to that program and they invite me 2 times a year to speak to that class
But
about
I
what I've
think,
done.
yeah, and you discovering it's so interesting, and also you're a great example of how taking advantage of the opportunities and again for the betterment of the community. I remember when I met you and you were and Kimberly was participating in the girls, of course, in some she was in the leadership program and you were doing the big Sunday, I think. There was a
Yes.
project and you did it in the high school and again I remember you being so passionate about that. And again, that's why, and when I called you now, because we've been in contact, thanks Facebook for that. So I
Yeah.
know that we've been connected at least online, but oh my God, how many things. Then you went for your master program, right?
Yeah, and so it's very interesting because I'm actually still 2 classes away from actually getting my degree. Because here's what happened when I went back and I did those programs, I was able to
Mhm.
graduate with 2 AAs, which I didn't plan on it. It just kind of
Uh-huh.
happened that way. And they had a special program through Arizona State University where they were allowing their public policy graduates to take on a 3-year bachelor's to master's program. And I could do
Oh,
it remotely. And
oh
so
my God.
as I was volunteering and like working and doing the work at the high school, I was doing that program and really just taking advantage again of anything that popped up. If someone was like, "Oh, we hear this great program and they want to train people to be speakers," I was like, "I'll do it. I'll do it."
Yeah. Yeah.
I did a lot of things for free, but I didn't consider it free. I really considered it as on the job learning because I was coming at this from a second life career. I was a 40-year-old woman with
Yeah.
4 kids, right? Kind
Mm.
of, I don't think competing, but learning at the same time as 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds who knew this is what they wanted to do, and
Yeah.
or diving into a new industry and network of people who had been doing it for 20 or 30 years. And what I had was just a passion to learn more and my own life experiences and skills to bring to like this new table. And and
Uh-huh.
and so I was able to do, there were a lot of things, Rafi, I did. I was just like, I don't know if this makes sense, but this is
Uh-huh.
just where the spirit is leading me to do this.
Yeah, and that's
And
so great. And you started to,
yeah.
as a teacher for the middle school is as an educator a while ago, right?
Yeah, so when I was working at VAPA was actually really transformative for me as well because the way I was able to get into that school literally was just as a parent. I was a joiner, so I did the parent groups and I did all that. But I realized in joining those groups and sitting on those committees it was such a prime space because I was doing this while I was in school and still learning, that it was a prime space for more sustainability practices,
Mm-hmm.
especially because I was super into public policy. So I knew where the city was
Yeah.
going and its sustainability plans and initiatives. We were downtown. It was a
Mm-hmm.
performing arts school. I knew that it had a niche to be something special and like media worthy, to
Mm-hmm.
combine all of these kind of, it was just a perfect melting pot to bring environmental issues.
Yeah.
The problem is working with a larger district, it can be a little bit difficult. What it
Mm-hmm.
allowed me to do was find where I was going to be able to make the best change. And I learned curriculum and I learned standards. And that was not initially where I was educating myself. And then I started diving more into education policy and what
Mm-hmm.
does it look like that they're teaching our kids and where is environmental literacy in that, and found that it was really missing and it wasn't there at all. And especially at VAPA, with having this multi-million dollar school sitting on top of a hill that's primed
Yeah.
for solar, that didn't have water capture, there were just so many opportunities to do sustainable work at that school.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just introduced it, and I knew the way that they were going to buy in was if it was connected to students and it was
Mm-hmm.
connected to student outcomes, and that they didn't have to spend any money, right? They
Mm-hmm.
didn't have to spend any
Yeah.
money. I was like, I'll take care of it. I'll make sure it gets done. I will bring the people in to help make it happen. That's where Big Sunday came in. And these
Yeah.
were all relationships because I came in from an outside, not necessarily a trained teacher, that I
Mm-hmm.
was able to have already had these relationships with nonprofits that I'd already worked with over the years, being a
Mm-hmm.
Girl Scout leader, being a
Mm-hmm.
parent, just being involved in the community. These were all people that I'd already dealt with who
Mm-hmm.
I knew were like minded. And the same with funding and budgeting. I just knew these avenues in which people want to spend money on socially conscious things and people just want to be connected. It's just often the times of finding the partnerships where people lack the ability to support, right? And
Yeah.
I started to see that. And so finding this middle school was really honestly the one I'm currently working at,
Mm-hmm.
like finding my tribe. And
Mm.
I think it's also a testament to understanding that no matter what age we are, we learn from each other in a cyclical, what's that word? A cyclical
Secret. Uh-huh.
manner,
Oh, wow.
right? That
Yeah.
I found this school from a 19-year-old kid who was also a student at Santa Monica College who had graduated from their high school. And she came and spoke to a training program I was in and had just gotten back from India. And her passion behind what she believed in was
Mhm.
so strong, it was palpable. And she had
Mm.
contributed all to having gone to this charter school, this
Oh my
environmental charter
God.
school,
And that's the name,
right?
right?
Chills.
Environmental Charter School.
Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
And that's the name. And I was like, I have got to find this school that she's
Yeah.
talking about, because she stressed she wasn't interested in the environment. She didn't care. She was a kid growing up in South Central. This was
Mm.
not where she wanted to go. It was a small school, and her mother made her go. And she said by the end, she realized that it changed her life
Oh
and
my
that it
God.
was the most important thing. And I got chills, and I was like, I
Yeah,
have
I
to
just got
find this
chills, by
place.
the way. I just got chills when you repeated what she said. Oh my God.
Right. And
Mhm.
so this 19-year-old girl, I was like obsessed with finding a way to get into this school. And I actually got in through like the after school program. I was I would literally watch their website, and anytime they had volunteer opportunities for just like the community,
Oh
I
my
would
God.
partake. And then one day something came up where they had an opportunity, they were looking for teachers for their after school program. And I was still in school. And so I thought, well, I could
Oh.
do 3 hours,
Mhm.
3 days a week.
Mhm.
And that's almost 8 years
Oh,
later.
oh my
And
God. You're
yeah.
an example of that. You have been following your passion and, and
Mhm.
going through what is being guided you. And again, you're an educator. You love the environment. You've been through all of this. So I'm just so happy again of your example. And you also, I found you, as I said, in an international eco, something like that.
Yeah, Earth Eco International was one of those amazing opportunities I got working with this organization, with this school, and so many more like it. And it's empowering because I would say I've been full time in this work now about 13 years or
Mm,
so. Because even before I came working full time in this school, if I put all the years together that I've
yeah.
been learning and trusting, there's there's been such a growth in awareness and such a deeper understanding of the importance around learning the kind of education that I teach. And I'm seeing it become more widespread. And so organizations like Earth Eco International that have always been around but has more of a reach, does amazing educational work. And it's the Cousteaus, the children, grandchildren of Jacques Cousteau,
Oh, yeah.
and him and his sisters started this educational organization, a nonprofit that really focuses on ocean and water because it's
Uh-huh.
very relevant to his grandfather, but their arms reach into intersectional issues around the environment. So I was
Ah,
very lucky to be chosen of one of 24 teachers who spent a whole week together learning everything there is to learn about water
uh-huh.
and created a curriculum around it that lives on their website. And from that, I was able to work on more curriculum and competitions with them. They're an amazing bunch, and they're all over
Mm.
the world.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Eh,
that's one way I've been able to do my work.
and you again, I just wish that people that are passionate about anything, but you are passionate about, you have 4 children, and I've seen you as a mother, but about taking care of the environment. So, what would be your recommendations for us, or even for people or young people that are listening to you and they want to go through that route? That I think is one question, but the other is, how can Rosie, how can my family in Miami, how can people in here with the fires that we have, how can we take care of our earth?
Yes, that's such a great question. And there are so many different answers. I always tell people when we look at issues that are negatively impacting our earth, they're very wicked issues. And by wicked, I mean complex, which means that they're going to need complex, wicked solutions. And so that means at every level, each one of us has to commit to doing what we can
Mhm.
and not, I mean, there obviously climate change and science around what's happening to our earth is very debatable. And we do not have a consensus, 100% consensus across our nation
Mhm.
of the science.
Yeah.
And so changing behaviors and changing ideals is an essential part of the work, educating ourselves on it. And I can understand, I think meeting people where they are is super important because I can completely understand how people can debate the
Mhm.
science. I mean, I feel like we're very close in age. And so we both have the opportunity to have lived in where our one foot is in how life used to be
Yeah.
and how quickly life has exponentially grown as far as awareness and technology.
Yeah.
We have one foot in that world too. We have lived through a transformative part of the way humans operate on this earth and how we use the earth. And so that's why it can be a little bit clearer for us to see it. But if you are of a generation that has never seen it any different, like,
Yeah.
and when I say different, I remember you got red apples and you got green apples. And when yellow apples, when golden apples were introduced, it was like, what? And you didn't eat melons out of season because it wasn't as globalized as it is now. You
Mm.
definitely didn't have cell phones and internet, and you didn't travel. People didn't get on planes the way they get on planes now.
Yeah.
The accessibility that we have also creates disconnection. And when we have disconnection of how things come to be, what resources we use to create the things we need, then it makes complete sense that we don't pay attention to how we use them or how we dispose of them. And so I think it has to start with changing people's perspectives. And the only way you can do that is to show people different perspectives.
Mm.
And understanding that we each have to, not that we should want to, But this is, it sounds so cliche, it's our only planet.
Yeah.
And our planet, we have the science behind what makes our planet naturally cycle and process and work. And those cycles and processes and the way that the earth works is essential to our own survival. And the way that if we can see ourselves as part of earth and a species just like any other species, then we're a lot more aware of when one species goes extinct or is impacted by something. We are 6 degrees away from that.
Yeah.
And so once we can understand those things, then we can start making actions. And I'm excited about our new administration
Yeah.
because I think that this is the first time that we are really seeing the language being spoken
Mm-hmm.
and the intentionality behind policies. Not saying it's not going to be a hard work, because now it's going to take every other level to do the same thing and to coordinate. And that's shown and proven to be very difficult.
Yeah.
But people with boots on the ground have been doing the work. And we need the policy. We need the executive branch to put into action federal laws so that everybody else in every other level can do what they need to do.
And now that you just mentioned that, one of the reasons why we changed this, not just being a Spanish podcast or program highlighting Hispanic, but to incorporate the multicultural world that I love and we all live in, is because precisely
Mm-hmm.
we, with this new administration, we really need to do a lot of work in all areas, of
Mm-hmm.
course, because I think we went back ages, like 50 years back, or at least
Right.
that's how I
Yes.
felt. But let me tell you one thing, Tashanda, before you start talking to us a little more about the Black History Month, which I love to
Mm-hmm.
know more about that. But um,
Mm-hmm.
when I when the elections in 2016 happened, I remember,
Mm-hmm.
and I was gonna look in Facebook in your page, but I didn't today.
Mm-hmm.
I remember you put something, and I don't know if it was during the election because we have lived so many, injustices all this time.
Injustices.
So, but you put something. I remember when you put that phrase, and for me it was like shocking, because it was the same shocking when the elections 2016, and I said no, 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 this is not true, and I lived in a shock for a couple of years, I think. but uh but
Mm-hmm.
but you wrote something like, you said, so now, and I don't remember, but maybe you do.
I
But
was trying to
yeah,
remember.
but you said something like, now you know that we live in a racist America or something like that. No, so now
Mm,
something like that really I didn't know. I didn't know. I'm
mm,
really
mm-hmm,
colorblind, and I know that people, some people even, argue this psychology term of colorblind. But I really feel I was
mm,
raised in Honduras, and again, I have nephews and nieces that are, so I the color of the skin, or even the status of any person, how many money you have, I don't really care. But I didn't
mm,
realize, and with Black Lives Matter, it's again shocking for me, and I've discovered so many different things during these 4 years that I decided to
mm-hmm,
just put all that I have in. I'm a communicator, even my accent, which
mm-hmm,
I think people are
mm-hmm.
gonna enjoy. No, but my associate producer is gonna be doing some other interviews. But as I say, I talk a lot, and I remember Kimberly. Kimberly told me one
Yeah.
time, Mommy, you really don't care when you speak in English or Spanish, even with your accent and what people think. And I was, no, I don't. But anyway,
I love it.
but
I love
anyway,
it.
let me again, Tashanda, I didn't know that we were living in a
Yeah.
country that was like that. So please tell me about that. You, as you know, you told me, your parent, your mother was from Trinidad and Tobago. That's what you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
So immigrant, you're a
Yes.
daughter of immigrants too. And you're
Yeah.
also, an African American in US. What does that mean for you?
Yeah. That's so interesting when you say colorblind, because up until probably a few years ago, that would be my mantra. I
Hmm.
literally grew up the same way. I mean, realizing I was born in the early 70s, so my parents were
Hmm.
teenagers during the time of like civil, the end of civil rights, and really just like the loving your blackness and all of that, but also young enough to want to try to be colorblind. So I really was not raised with any kind of racial, I don't know how to say, other than to say in my house, what was important was being a kind person. And so that was what was really beaten into me as far as like what my upbringing was. It was never color first. Again, my parents were young and my dad was in the Navy. So I saw all kind of people in our house all the time, and there was never ever a differentiation. There was never a description of what someone was by their race first, if that makes
Yeah, of
sense.
course.
I just always remember the most important was being a good person and being helpful for people. Those were the things that you looked at and you determined if someone was good or bad, or who was your friend or who wasn't. Those were kind of the moral and value lessons. So when I moved to California, honestly, and then of course growing up in Seattle, it's not like color was completely out of my sight because I had eyes. I was often one of two Black children in a school. I grew up in Seattle when it wasn't very diverse at that time. There was a lot of Pacific Islanders. I grew up with Native Americans, and I grew up with Asians, and I grew up with whites. I didn't grow up with a lot of Latino people unless I went to New York, and that was still very different than the Latinos that you would see here in California or meet here in California. So there were a lot of firsts for me when I moved here full time. And also being a Black person, being raised in a time where you didn't have TV and social media to see what people were doing who looked like you
Yeah.
in different parts of the world. I just happened to have been a really creative and imaginative person and read a lot. So I would infuse whatever I didn't see that looked like me in my mind, they still looked like me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know, it was just very different for me. And it wasn't smacked in my face till I moved here in California and realized how kind of sheltered I was around that issue. Now, fast forward to raising children, having understood, I had a hard time transitioning from being a middle school child in Seattle, Washington, and literally being able to count on one hand how many Black children were in your entire middle school, to being in a high school with the majority Black students, or majority Latin or Black students. And I had never had that before. I didn't listen to the same music. I didn't I didn't know the slang. I didn't know any of that. I was raised like my mother was from Trinidad. That's British upbringing. I was raised like reading and having to be very articulate. And then color and race was very different for us also because my mother was an immigrant. My mother came from an island with an accent. An American Black and any other country Black can be very different,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Your culture is different.
Different, of course.
And so my mother had a hard time assimilating, even though she, she was Black, she was Carib Indian, and she was African in descent, but she was from a different country and she had an accent and her culture was different. So she had a hard time assimilating. So I think that also played into my upbringing, where she never talked down about being like an American Black, but again, it was just not something we talked about. Now, I used to think that was beautiful. I always thought that I was like the lucky one that we never talked about race. But once I went to college and took an African American course, I realized how many things I did not know,
Yeah.
and how many things I wasn't taught, and how many things about my people and their struggle and what they fought for that I had grown up until I was 18 before I ever knew, because it was never taught to me in school. And I got West Indian culture, but it wasn't, my mom wasn't raised here. And so she didn't get American history culture like that either, or teachings. And so that was really missing. And I had to teach myself. And I made it a point when I had kids to make sure that they had both worlds, all kinds of worlds, not just two, but that they did have exposure. But even in that, I could have done more. And I realized, especially in this past year, let alone the past 4 years, the understanding of so many different people's culture is why we bubbled
Hmm.
the way we did.
Yeah.
I happen to be a very open person, so I've never had an issue with understanding someone else or having again I've had friends from everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel very comfortable, but I also completely understand um, the racial tension, especially understanding the oppression, the lack of true history and education that not just Black people, but everybody in this country has had the lack, the deficit of learning
Yeah.
has us where we are. And again, we are not that far historically. We're a very young country. We're a very, very young country. And we are just now getting to a time in our space where people who have lived through Jim Crow, the last of descendants of living slaves, are just now starting to die. That shows us we are not that far from when that
Hmm.
happened, you know? And so when you have, almost 500 years of breaking down a people and dehumanizing them, that's a lot of years of trying to reprogram a people
Yeah.
to think oppositely. So when they talk about systemic racism, when we talk about the embeddedness of racial identities and the oppression that comes with it, it's hundreds of years of it. It's in our
Yeah.
DNA. It's the way that we know how our relationships work with each other because we haven't had enough time to evolve out of it.
Yeah.
And again, I see everything through an ecological lens, and so understanding biologically, understanding the science we have behind passing trauma down, um,
Yes.
I find it to be, and we're in a place where we're getting enlightened, and so it's an exciting place, even though it hurts so bad to see all of these things and for all of this realization. Like you're saying, there were things you didn't know. I have so many friends who were like, I had no clue.
Yeah.
I didn't know. And then I have so many friends, including one of my sons who's very, very involved, who don't understand. How could you not know? How could you not know?
Yeah.
But I know, me personally, having lived the kind of life that I lived, I know personally how you could not know, you
Yeah.
know? And I think we should focus more now. I think the shock of people not knowing has to wear off so that we can get to the real work, because we are at a paradigm shift, and it's only at this time that we can make real change, because it's already hurting. And so we need to just do the work and get through the hurt to get through the healing.
Yeah.
And I feel like we have that space with equality and racial issues, just like we have it with environmental issues.
Oh my God, yes. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why, again, the only thing that I know, not that I know, but that I am very passionate to do is to communicate. I hope that you are back in the program, because again, that's why I introduce you as a brilliant mind and kind spirit, because
Aww.
you are. Oh my God, I remember I will be here more than an hour, but it's like that, Tashanda, and I am so glad you were telling me so many things that I remember Kimberly when she first came to LA. We first came, came to middle school, and her friends were from Middle East, Anglo, and Korean, and she was the Latina. She was the 2% Latina, and you were saying that you lived that in Seattle or in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it depends,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, because right now where I am, where I live, and where I have my office is a lot of Armenians. I'm the 2%, even maybe the only Latin in the
Mm.
office, and I enjoy it so much. I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
That's my thing. For me, there's no difference. There's no difference. And if
Right.
someone treats me differently, I try like 3 times and then I move away. I don't know how to explain this, but
Right.
it's that their knowledge, their, I don't want to say their problem, but I don't feel,
They're
yeah,
lost.
it's their loss.
It's their loss.
but
Right?
we're
It's their
so
loss.
together on this thinking that I really want more people to hear you talking about environment and also this. So for you, what is the meaning of the Black History Month?
I especially love Black History Month working in a school, right? Because we get to really, especially this year, we get to navigate through what it really can look like for these students. And we can set muscle memory for them on how they can celebrate and what they know. And again, this organization I work for is really, really forward thinking in this type of work. And so I have to be honest, in the past, celebrating Black History Month, especially as a mother at home, has not taken on the same feel that it's going to take this year, almost in every type of celebration, because where a lot of people during the Black Lives Movement who are people of non-color, are people of color who are not Black, have found themselves like learning new stuff. Well, we have too. I mean, I can speak for me. I have too. I've been learning so much more about my history and implementing more traditions that I haven't really done in the past with my children, even my Trinidadian cultural tradition. And so celebrating holidays that I would passively have celebrated in lieu of the normal natural holidays of America, we have decided as a family to be more intentional in celebrating. So we're doing that this year for Black History Month as well, even at my school, at home. And it's really about spending that time being explicit about learning about the history, like really learning, getting my kids to read people who did work, who are Black or even African, who have done work in the fields that they're passionate about, or things that so that they know the people who paved the path for them to even enjoy or be able to do the things that they do. That's really important.
Oh my God.
Really celebrating our cinema and celebrating our heroes in a way where we're learning more about them, sharing that with other people, taking the time out in an evening and really having a discussion about a piece. I think those types of traditions we are taking more to heart this year than we have in the
And
past.
it is really important. And again, for me, it's like the same. We're going to have filmmakers too here and activists and other people. But for me, again, it's the same. For me, this is a multicultural award. I obviously honor this month for you. I was telling you when we talked before about the Hispanic Heritage Month, and we have all this tradition, but it's really important, as you said, to, to uplift the image, because again, we've had terrible for years, and I will repeat it every time. But Tashanda, please say hi to your beautiful little women, and they are already adults,
I
and they are so
will.
beautiful.
Yours
Yeah,
too.
and your boys
Yours
too,
too.
smart as their parents. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being in Dale. Tell me. Thank you for all the things that you share with us, and I'm so glad. And again,
Oh, thank
I
you.
know, and I'm pretty sure that you will be here again, because again, this was I can't stop. I can, but I have to.
Well, I would love to come back anytime, and I thank you. I love talking to you, and I love that we stayed in
Yeah.
contact, and I love that you're doing this
Please
show.
keep doing
So
what
thank
you're
you for
doing.
having me.
Keep doing what you're doing, Tashanda, because you're a true change maker for positive change in the world. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here and making this community grow. These are talks with people who are positive change makers in this beautiful multicultural world. So stay tuned. Hasta la próxima.